But the story of derisking as a regime for central banks, which I tell in my research and which you can see historically emerging, is of central banks increasingly assuming a derisking role for government bonds. That's in a sense where derisking starts on a significant scale. And then it becomes a discourse. I didn't call it so. If you read my early research on quantitative easing or on what we call a market maker of last resort for government bonds, a role that central banks assume, I didn't call it derisking because, I mean, it didn't occur to me, to be honest, it didn't occur to me that it was derisking. I just thought, well, this is a way to basically pretend that we are divorced, but we still are tied together. The monetary and fiscal policy are tied together. The monetary and fiscal institutions are tied together, and the central bank just has to somehow, support that continuing divorced relationship in a different way because finance has changed so massively. But then by 2015, derisking acquires a life of its own as a term, as a concept, as a political imaginary, when the IMF and the World Bank launch what they call the billion to trillion agenda, which is the idea that we can get trillions of financing for development if we derisk. When the president of the World Bank in 2017 then launches the Maximizing Finance for Development agenda, and he says, in order to get more money into poor countries, into global south countries, which require a lot more investment in infrastructure in particular, we have to think about, we have to derisk projects, we have to derisk sectors, and we have to derisk countries. So the discourse of derisking becomes a part of what I call the Wall Street consensus overtly, and it moves from the domain of monetary policy, where it was implemented as a logic of preserving the state-capital relationships that were built during neoliberalism. It moves from there into other domains where elected politicians are starting to deploy it as a way of leaving neoliberalism behind, but without changing the fiscal monetary architecture.
Right, but you can tell that story in two different ways. The way you told it sort of emphasizes the continuity, how these investibility pacts were there from the beginning and were finally assumed as such. You can also tell it in a flip side way, which would go to the fact that you didn't call it de-risking in your early work in 2011, is that in the beginning, it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, these investibility pacts were very much premised on the Washington consensus idea that you just need the markets to do its job and that will be for the better. And so therefore, the government is just there, the government meaning the central bank, the repo markets and so forth, are just there to make sure that private finance invests, right? Then with the accumulation of crises comes a slightly different discourse that doesn't change the necessity of these investibility pacts and the fact that they're very much preserved and buttressed, if anything. But nonetheless, the rationale changes a little bit. And it's no longer in the name of letting finance do its thing, but in the name of encouraging finance to do the right thing. And that's when you get from an implicit Wall Street consensus, it seems to me, to an explicit Wall Street consensus.
Yes, that's a very clever way of putting it, I guess. The monetary de-risking that I described, where the central bank says, okay, I will preserve my independence, even if I know that my independence is fundamentally predicated on the idea that I stay out of government bond markets. This is how Milton Friedman imagined it. This is how Milton Friedman described it. This is how Milton Friedman pushed it. I now have to recognize that the modern financial system which we have designed has its cornerstone of stability and of credit creation or government bond markets, and therefore I have to intervene there for financial stability reasons to restore orderly market functioning. This is how, for example, how both Mario Draghi, who is, the European liberal elites used to call him Super Mario because against German will and against, there is a fascinating account in the Financial Times of Angela Merkel crying in a meeting with Barack Obama, and there are tears falling down her cheek, and you think, why is this woman who is viewed as the most effective politician in Europe, why is she crying? And she's crying because Barack Obama is trying to get her to allow the ECB to intervene in government bond markets. This probably is the only episode I'm aware of where a politician is crying about central bank interventions in government bond markets.
Which is very moving for you. Right?
Well, it is moving in some ways because if she had cried 2 years earlier, it would have been great. It took 2 years for this crying to take place, and I think it's moving also because we generally spend so little time. This is my biggest complaint in life, is that we don't spend enough time thinking about central banks, observing central banks, noticing them. In my progressive political circles, most people don't think that the central bank is an important political actor. And then when I tell the story that Angela Merkel cries in 2011 because Barack Obama says, either you let the ECB buy government bonds or the whole system crashes, and please let them. And she says, no, I can't do this. Bundesbank doesn't want me. This is against my people, blah, 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 blah. There, you're right. There, it is a political instance where we see monetary derisking is a form of reestablishing the market order of neoliberalism and of financialization. It is not done for transformative purposes. It's a defensive, let's call it a defensive derisking. It simply is trying to defend financial capital from its worst kind of destructive tendencies, which is, you speculate on government bonds and then they crash, and then the entire edifice of your modern financial system collapses. You're right. And then by 2015, this defensive derisking in the monetary sphere, which incidentally greatly increases the political power of central banks. The fiscal powers of central banks are much larger than they were during the Milton Friedman era in some ways, because now we are in a world, in the Wall Street consensus, where central banks have complete discretion whether they intervene or not. They have discretion over how much government bonds they buy or sell, at what points, for what reasons. That discretion to me is a very significant problem, and probably we'll come back to that. But so leaving that aside, this defensive derisking of that central banks take with varying degrees of political questioning and political resistance. In the US, the Federal Reserve did this and nobody cared. In the United Kingdom, the Bank of England even adopted formally a market maker of last resort role in 2015, which said, I'm going to buy as many government bonds I like, whenever I like, and hold them for however long I like. Nobody batted an eye. It was the European Union, because of its particular institutional and political makeup, that created a lot more resistance to this defensive derisking. But by 2015, we shift into a more, let's call it, transformative derisking, as a mode in which derisking becomes a way of remaking capitalism and overcoming, particularly in Europe, some of the problems and difficulties of a long period of austerity. Because of course, this defensive derisking doesn't change the political commitment to fiscal austerity in the euro area or anywhere. It actually reinforces it, because it says it's very difficult for central banks to account for it as a, I mean, they sometimes do. When they talk to financial markets, they say, we buy government bonds during periods of market stress because we are worried about financial stability and we want an orderly functioning of this market that is not just providing the sovereign with resources to conduct fiscal policy, but it's a market that provides market-based finance with the asset that allows the entire system to function. Right, so that's the story that they tell to private finance, but to other political actors, the story is usually, well, these sovereigns don't have sound fiscal positions, and we have to think very carefully about fiscal dominance, and we don't really like intervening, and la la la. So to me, this defensive derisking reinforces the political impulse and the political dominance, to some extent hegemony of fiscal austerity. Whereas the transformative derisking of that picks up pace and becomes visible as a political project in 2015, that is about let's reimagine the world, let's transform the world, let's transform our economies, and that will require us to partner with private capital.